My name is Evelyn. I am 32 years old. My mother thinks I'm a jobless failure. She has no idea I'm the secret reason her lights are still on. My eyes felt like they were full of sand. I blinked, trying to clear the blur as the last line of code executed on my third monitor. A green progress bar slid across the screen, confirming the patch was holding. "Target secure," I whispered to the empty room. It was 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday, but inside my apartment it looked like midnight. The blackout curtains were drawn tight, sealed at the edges with duct tape to prevent even a sliver of Virginia sunshine from hitting my screens. The air smelled of stale pepperoni pizza and the ozone hum of overheating hard drives. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. While the rest of the East Coast was watching Netflix or commuting to work, I had been manually rerouting a denial of service attack meant to cripple the power grid of 3 states. I was the reason the traffic lights were working in D.C. right now. I was the reason the hospitals had power. And I was currently wearing sweatpants with a hole in the knee and a hoodie covered in Cheeto dust. I pushed my chair back, my spine popping like a string of firecrackers. I just needed to crash, just 4 hours of sleep before the next briefing. I stood up, swaying slightly, and headed toward the kitchen to chug some water. That's when I heard it, the terrifying jiggle click of the front door lock. My stomach dropped. I had high-grade digital locks, but I had made the fatal mistake of giving a physical key to one person 3 years ago for emergencies. The door swung open, letting in a blinding shaft of natural light that hit me like a physical slap. "Evelyn, good Lord, it smells like a locker room in here." My mother, Barbara, stood in the doorway. She looked like she had just stepped out of a catalog for aggressive realtors. Beige power suit, hair sprayed into a helmet of blonde perfection, and a look of absolute disdain painted on her face. "Mom," I croaked. My voice was raspy from disuse. "Please, I'm sleeping." She didn't listen. She never listened. She marched in, her heels clicking loudly on the hardwood floor, a sharp, rhythmic assault on my headache. She immediately went to the window and ripped the blackout curtains open. "Hissing is not a polite reaction, Evelyn," said she as I shielded my eyes. "Look at this place. You're 32 years old. You live like a mole." "I work nights," I lied. It was the standard lie. It was close enough to the truth. "Work," she scoffed, picking up a pizza box with 2 fingers as if it were radioactive. "I saw Mrs. Gable outside. Her daughter just made partner at her law firm. She wears a blazer, Evelyn. She owns a condo in Georgetown." "I own this condo," I mumbled, leaning against the counter for support. "Paid for with what? Inheritance money?" She began aggressively tidying the kitchen island, stacking my mail. "You're burning through your savings, aren't you? You think you can just drift through life while the adults handle the real world?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that the real world she cherished was currently hanging by a thread I was holding. But the NDA I signed 7 years ago was ironclad. To her, to the neighbors, to everyone, I was Evelyn the burnout, Evelyn the disappointment. "Mom, leave the mail," I said, seeing her pause over an open envelope I'd forgotten to shred. It was a bank statement. Usually I went paperless, but the credit union sent a physical confirmation for a transfer I'd made last week, a contracting bonus for the grid operation. Barbara pulled the paper out. Her eyes scanned the numbers. She went still. The silence that followed was worse than her yelling. She turned to look at me, her face pale. "Evelyn, there is a deposit here for $50,000? "I can explain," I started, though I couldn't. $50,000? She repeated, her voice trembling. From a shell company? Apex Solutions? She looked from the paper to my dirty sweatpants, then to the darkened room filled with high-tech equipment. Her eyes hardened. The concern vanished, replaced by a cold, terrifying resolve. "You're laundering money," she whispered, "or you're selling something illegal. Drugs? Porn?" "What? No, Mom, it's a job." "People with jobs don't live in the dark," she shouted, slamming the paper down. "People with jobs don't look like you. I knew you were struggling. I knew you were depressed, but I didn't think you were a criminal." "I am not a criminal. You are unstable," she yelled back. "You can barely hold a conversation, let alone a job. You're sick, Evelyn, and I have let this go on too long." She grabbed her purse and backed toward the door, looking at me like I was a stranger she needed to report to the authorities. "I'm going to fix this," she said, her voice shaking with a mix of anger and martyrdom. "Since you obviously can't take care of yourself, I'm going to have to do it for you." She slammed the door. I stood there in the sudden silence, the bright sun burning my retinas, the bank statement crumpled on the counter. I should have chased her. I should have tried harder to lie, but exhaustion washed over me like a tidal wave. I didn't know what she meant by "fix this." I just knew I needed to sleep. I collapsed on the couch, thinking I'd deal with Barbara's drama when I woke up. I had no idea that by the time I opened my eyes, the war would have already started.
I woke up to the sound of someone pounding on my door. Not the rhythmic, polite knock of a delivery driver, but the heavy, authoritative thud of someone who wasn't going away. I peeled my face off the leather couch cushion. My mouth tasted like cotton, and a dull ache throbbed behind my left eye. The digital clock on the microwave read 6:45 p.m. I had been asleep for maybe 4 hours. "Coming!" I yelled, my voice cracking. I stumbled toward the door, checking the peephole. It wasn't my mother. It was a man I didn't recognize, stocky, wearing a windbreaker, holding a clipboard. I cracked the door open, leaving the security chain on. "Can I help you?" "Evelyn Davis?" the man asked. He didn't smile. He looked bored. "Yes?" He shoved a thick envelope through the crack in the door before I could react. "You've been served." He turned and walked away before the paper even hit the floor. I stared at the envelope. It was heavy, manila, and stamped with the seal of the county court. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of my neck and crawled down my spine. I undid the chain and picked it up. My hands shook slightly as I ripped the tab. I pulled out a stack of documents, the paper crisp and smelling of toner. Petition for emergency conservatorship. Petitioner, Barbara Davis. Respondent, Evelyn Davis. The words swam before my eyes. Conservatorship? That was for people with dementia. That was for people in comas. I flipped to the second page, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I read the allegations my mother had sworn to under penalty of perjury. The respondent exhibits signs of severe mental instability, unable to maintain gainful employment, living in squalor, suspected illicit financial activities indicating a lack of capacity to manage affairs. "She didn't," I whispered to the empty hallway, but she had. She had taken my messy apartment, my dark circles, and that one bank statement, and she had weaponized them. She wasn't just trying to nag me anymore, she was trying to legally delete me as an adult. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers fumbling over the screen as I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Hello, Evelyn." Her voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. It was the voice she used when she was talking to a toddler or a waiter she was about to tip poorly. "Mom, what is this?" I demanded, pacing the length of my kitchen. "I just got served papers. You're trying to put me in a conservatorship?" "I'm trying to save you." I could hear the clinking of silverware in the background. She was eating dinner. She was destroying my life, and she was eating dinner. Save me. Mom, I have a job. I have a life. You can't just take away my rights because I don't wear a blazer. Evelyn, honey, listen to yourself, she said, her tone dripping with pity. You're hysterical. You're screaming. This is exactly what I told the judge. You're spiraling. I am not spiraling. I am angry. And where did that $50,000 come from, Evelyn? Her voice dropped, sharp and accusatory. You couldn't answer me earlier. You have no W-2s that I've ever seen. You sit in the dark. It's okay to admit you need help. Once the court grants me control, we can get you into a nice facility. We can clean up that apartment. We can manage your assets. I froze. The blood drained from my face. It wasn't just about the humiliation, it was the clearance. If I was placed under a conservatorship, if a court declared me mentally unfit to manage my own affairs, my top-secret SCI clearance would be revoked immediately. I would be flagged as a security risk. I wouldn't just lose my autonomy, I would lose my career. I would lose the ability to do the one thing I was truly brilliant at. Mom, you have to stop this, I said, my voice low and deadly serious. You have no idea what you are doing. If you go through with this, you will ruin everything. I'm doing what a mother has to do. The hearing is in 3 days. Wear something nice, Evelyn. Try to look sane. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring at it until it went black. The silence of the apartment felt different now. It wasn't a sanctuary anymore, it was a cage. I looked at the server rack humming in the corner, my link to the Pentagon, to the grid, to the digital heartbeat of the nation. I could stop a cyber nuke from hitting Chicago, but I couldn't stop my own mother from dragging me into a county courthouse. I needed a lawyer, and I needed one who wouldn't ask why the NSA had a direct line to my bedroom.
I pulled at the collar of the blouse I'd bought at Target an hour ago. It was itchy, stiff, and a shade of salmon pink that made me look like I had the flu. But Mom had said, wear something nice, and apparently, nice meant dressing like a frantic PTA mom. Marcus Vance's office was small, smelling of lemon polish and burnt coffee. He was a court-appointed attorney, but he had sharp eyes and a tie that was actually tied correctly. So, Marcus said, leaning back in his creaky leather chair. He tapped a pen against the stack of papers I'd slammed onto his desk. Let me get this straight. Your mother claims you are destitute, delusional, and potentially dangerous to yourself. And you claim, he looked at me, waiting, that I'm fine, I snapped. I'm employed. I pay my bills. With what? Marcus asked. I ran a standard credit check, Evelyn. You have no credit history for the last 7 years. No W-2s filed under your social security number since you worked at a Starbucks in 2016. That's classified, I said. Marcus sighed, the long, suffering sigh of a man who has heard every excuse in the book. He rubbed his temples. Evelyn, please, I am on your side, but if you go into Judge Miller's courtroom and say, it's classified, he's going to grant this conservatorship before lunch. That sounds exactly like what a delusional person would say. My stomach twisted. He was right. It sounded insane. I sounded insane. I work for the NSA. I'm a Tier-1 analyst. My income is routed through shell corporations to protect my identity because I deal with state-level cyber threats. If I show you my real bank records, I go to federal prison. If I don't, I go into a conservatorship. Marcus stared at me. He didn't blink. The air conditioning hummed loudly in the silence. Okay, he said slowly. Let's assume for 1 second I believe you. Just for the sake of argument. You are a ghost. Your mother is trying to catch a ghost. Exactly. But the court deals in paper, Evelyn. Concrete evidence. If you can't provide it, you lose. Is there anyone,
anyone at all who can verify this without getting us all arrested? I thought of my handler, Agent Reynolds. He was a man made of stone and protocol. He hated domestic disputes. He hated exposure. Asking him to intervene in a family drama was like asking a shark to babysit. There might be a way, I said, my mind racing through the protocols I'd memorized during orientation. A Section 12B disclosure. It's a sealed brief. It goes by the public record. It goes directly to the Chief Justice's eyes only. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You know a lot of legal code for a shut-in. I know a lot of code, period. He looked at me for a long moment, studying my face. He saw the dark circles, the jittery hands, the ill-fitting blouse, but he also saw something else. Maybe it was the desperation. Maybe it was the precision of my language. If you can get a Section 12B authorized, Marcus said, leaning in, it has to be on the Chief Justice's desk before the gavel drops. That gives you 48 hours. And if I can't? Marcus grimaced. Then you better get used to asking your mother for an allowance. I stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. I'll get it. Evelyn, Marcus called out as I reached the door. I turned back. Your mother, he said softly. She's bringing witnesses, neighbors, family friends. They're going to paint a picture of you that is very ugly. Are you ready for that? I thought of Barbara's face when she looked at my apartment. The disgust, the shame. I've been invisible for 7 years, Marcus. I think I can handle being seen for one day. I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, fished my burner phone from my purse, and dialed the number that I was only supposed to use if the country was under attack. This felt close enough. The phone rang once, twice. Then came the click, a sharp digital snap that sounded like a gun being cocked. Status, a voice growled. No hello, no name, just Agent Reynolds. I stood in the alley behind Marcus's office, pressing the phone so hard against my ear it hurt. A dumpster nearby smelled of rotting fruit, a sharp contrast to the sterile fear gripping my chest. I have a situation, sir. Code yellow. Personnel integrity at risk. Is the grid compromised? Reynolds asked, his voice instantly dropping an octave. No, I am compromised. I took a shaky breath. My mother has filed for a legal conservatorship over me. The hearing is in 48 hours. If she wins, she gets legal power of attorney. She gets access to my finances. She gets to audit my life. Silence. The line was so quiet I could hear the faint static of the encryption algorithm cycling. If she audits your finances, Reynolds said slowly, she finds the shell accounts. She finds the DOD transfers. She thinks I'm a drug dealer, sir, or insane. She's bringing witnesses to prove I can't function. If the judge grants this, Barbara Davis, president of the local garden club, will have legal authority to demand my passwords. We can't have that, Reynolds snapped. We'll pull you. We'll scrub your identity, relocate you to Nevada. No, I shouted, causing a passing pedestrian to shy away from me. I lowered my voice to a desperate hiss. I don't want to be erased, Reynolds. I've given 7 years to the agency. I live in the dark. I have no friends. I have no life. All I have is my name. Don't take that from me, too. Then fix it, Davis. I can't fix it with lies. I need a Section 12B disclosure. Send it to Chief Justice Miller. He has the clearance level. Just let him know I'm not unemployed. Let him know I'm necessary. Reynolds let out a long, frustrated breath. A 12B requires signatures from 3 department heads. It's asking the government to blink first. If you don't, I said, my voice hardening, then on Monday morning, my mother is going to walk into a frantic search for why Apex Solutions is paying her daughter a government salary. Do you want that investigation? A pause. Longer this time. You have a shift tonight, Davis, Reynolds said, his voice cold again. The grid attack is mutating. The signature is changing. Focus on the code. If you save the Eastern Seaboard, maybe I'll see what I can do about your mother." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my hand trembling. Maybe. Maybe in the intelligence world usually meant no. I drove home in a daze, stripping off the itchy salmon blouse the second I walked through the door. I threw it into the corner and pulled on my favorite hoodie. It smelled like fabric softener and safety. I sat down at my terminal. The screens were flashing red. Intrusion detected, Sector 4. For the next 12 hours, I didn't think about Barbara. I didn't think about the judge. I became the code. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the clack, clack, clack sounding like machine gun fire. I battled a hacker in St. Petersburg who was trying to overload the transformers in majestic silence. It was a dance of logic and will, and I was winning. I was powerful here. Here, I wasn't Evelyn the disappointment. I was a god. But reality has a way of piercing even the thickest firewalls. Around 3 a.m., my personal cell phone buzzed. It skittered across the desk, vibrating against a half-empty can of energy drink. New voicemail. Mom. I shouldn't have listened to it. I was in the middle of a delicate packet trace. But my thumb hovered over the screen, and I pressed play. "Evelyn," Mom's voice filled the dark room. She sounded tired, martyred. "I stopped by, but you didn't answer. Probably sleeping again or playing your games." She sighed, a sound that carried the weight of 1,000 disappointments. "I found your old yearbook today. You had such potential, honey. I'm doing this because I can't watch you throw it all away. Tomorrow in court, please don't make a scene. Just let the judge help you. Let me help you. It's for your own good." The message ended. I looked at my reflection in the black mirror of the center monitor. Pale skin, messy hair, eyes wide and bloodshot. I looked exactly like the person she described. Unstable, broken. "It's for your own good," I mocked softly, my voice bitter. On the screen, the red warning light turned green. Threat neutralized. I'd just saved 1 million people from a blackout. Nobody would ever know. My mother thought I was playing games. I grabbed a sticky note and a pen. I wrote down the time of the court hearing. Then I looked at the encrypted chat window on my secure line. Reynolds hadn't messaged back. There was no confirmation of the 12B. I was going into that courtroom alone. The county courthouse smelled like floor wax and bad news. It was a smell that stuck to the back of your throat, sterile and suffocating. I walked through the metal detector, my heels clicking awkwardly on the terrazzo floor. I wasn't used to heels. I was used to sneakers that allowed for silent movement. I tugged at the hem of my blazer, black, professional, and bought in a panic from a department store an hour ago. I had tried to look like the successful woman I was, but I just felt like a kid playing dress-up in her mother's closet. Marcus was waiting for me by the elevators. He looked grim. "Morning," he said, checking his watch. "You're cutting it close." "Traffic," I muttered. The truth was, I had spent 20 minutes in my car hyperventilating, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "Did you get it?" Marcus asked, his voice low. He didn't have to specify what it was. "I don't know," I admitted, the shame burning my cheeks. My handler didn't confirm. It might be there, it might not. Marcus tightened his jaw. He looked like a man watching a car crash in slow motion. "Great, so we're flying blind. Listen, Evelyn, if that brief isn't on the judge's bench, we have to pivot. We have to plead for a delay. We have to—" He stopped. His eyes drifted over my shoulder, and his expression softened into something resembling pity. I turned around. At the end of the hallway, near the double doors of courtroom 4B, stood my mother. She looked impeccable in a navy blue suit, her hair sprayed into submission. But she wasn't alone. Surrounding her was a small flock of women. I recognized them instantly. Mrs. Gable from next door, Mrs. Henderson from the church choir, my Aunt Linda.
She brought an audience, I whispered, feeling the blood drain from my face. She brought witnesses, Marcus corrected, character witnesses, to testify to your decline. My mother spotted me. She said something to the group, probably something sad and brave, and then walked toward me. Her heels sounded confident, rhythmic. Click, click, click. "Evelyn," she said, reaching out to straighten my lapel. I flinched, but she pretended not to notice. "You look presentable, better than yesterday." "Why are they here, Mom?" I nodded toward the women who were watching us with that specific brand of suburban sympathy that feels like a knife in the gut. "They care about you, honey," Barbara said, her voice soft and terrifyingly reasonable. "Mrs. Gable is going to tell the judge about how she sees you through the window at 3 a.m. staring at screens. Mrs. Henderson is going to talk about how you missed Christmas dinner last year." "I was working," I hissed. "I was tracking a botnet based in North Korea." Barbara patted my cheek. Her hand was cold. "See, you're doing it again, making up stories. It breaks my heart, Evelyn. It really does." She leaned in close, smelling of expensive perfume and hairspray. "You can stop this," she whispered. "Just agree to the petition. We don't have to go in there. We don't have to let Mrs. Gable say those things on the record. Just sign the paper, let me take control, and we can go get lunch. I know a lovely place that does Cobb salads." For a second, I almost broke. The temptation to just surrender, to stop fighting, to let her fix me was overwhelming. I was so tired. I had saved the grid last night, and no one knew. Here, I was just a disappointment. Then I thought about the code. I thought about the clearance. I thought about the person I was when the lights went out, the person that mattered. I pulled away from her touch. "I'm not hungry," I said, my voice trembling but firm. Barbara's face hardened. The mask of the concerned mother slipped, revealing the steel beneath. "Fine," she said, stepping back. "If you want to do this the hard way, we'll do it the hard way." She turned and marched back to her flock. They gathered around her, touching her arm, casting pitying glances at me, the unstable daughter, the burden. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed from inside the courtroom. The double doors swung open. "Showtime," Marcus muttered. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of wax and fear, and walked into the room where my life was about to be dismantled.
The courtroom was colder than the hallway. It was a deep, bone-chilling cold that seemed designed to keep everyone awake and uncomfortable. I sat at the defendant's table next to Marcus. My hands were folded in my lap, gripping each other so tightly that my fingers were numb. Across the aisle, my mother sat with her lawyer, a slick family practice shark named Mr. Henderson, who wore a suit that cost more than my car. Presiding was Justice Miller. He wasn't just a local magistrate, he was a circuit judge known for his impatience and his erratic blood sugar. He looked like a bulldog wearing a robe, jowls sagging, eyes heavy and bored. He shuffled papers on his high bench, not even looking at us. "Docket number 44B, he grumbled into the microphone. "Petition for conservatorship. Davis versus Davis. Let's get this over with. I have a sentencing hearing at 2. Mr. Henderson stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, we are here today to save a life. My client, Barbara Davis, is a devoted mother who has watched her only daughter descend into a spiral of mental instability, financial recklessness, and social isolation." I stared at the wood grain on the table. "Don't react," Marcus had whispered. "If you roll your eyes, you look immature. If you cry, you look unstable. Be a statue." So I became a statue. Barbara took the stand first. It was a masterclass in martyrdom. "I just want her to be safe," she said, her voice trembling perfectly. She dabbed at dry eyes with a tissue. "I go to her apartment, Your Honor, and it's pitch black in the middle of the day. Windows taped shut, strange electronic equipment humming everywhere. She doesn't speak to anyone. She hasn't had a verifiable job in 7 years." "And her finances?" Mr. Henderson prompted gently. "Erratic," she sniffed. "I found a bank statement, $50,000 deposited from a shell company. I fear she's involved in something dangerous or illegal. She's vulnerable, Your Honor. She can't even manage to buy groceries, yet suddenly she has this money. It's a sign of a manic episode." Justice Miller looked up, his interest piqued for the first time. "50,000? From where?" "Apex Solutions, Your Honor," Barber said. "It sounds like a scam." Marcus leaned over to me. "Apex Solutions is the NSA front?" he whispered. "Yes," I breathed. "We need that brief, now." I looked at the double doors at the back of the room. They remained closed. Reynolds hadn't come. The brief wasn't here. Barbara continued, gaining confidence. She called Mrs. Gable to the stand. My neighbor looked thrilled to be part of the drama. "Oh, she's a strange one," Mrs. Gable testified, adjusting her glasses. "I see her at 3 a.m. sometimes. I'm an insomniac, you see. I look out my window and there she is, pacing her living room, wearing headphones, talking to herself, shouting codes. Packet loss, backdoor entry. It's gibberish. The poor girl is out of her mind." "Thank you, Mrs. Gable," Henderson said, smirking. He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Evelyn Davis is a danger to herself. She is unemployed, socially maladjusted, and potentially engaging in criminal activity due to a break from reality. We ask that custody of her person and estate be granted to her mother immediately." Justice Miller sighed. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at me. "Miss Davis," the judge rumbled, "do you have anything to say? And please save me the 'I'm an entrepreneur' speech. I see no tax returns here." Marcus stood up slowly. "Your Honor, my client is employed. Her work is sensitive. We have requested documentation to prove—" "Documentation requested?" Miller cut him off. "Do you have it, counselor?" "Not at this moment, Your Honor, but—" "Then it doesn't exist," Miller snapped. He picked up his gavel. "I've heard enough. This court finds that the respondent lacks the capacity to manage her affairs. The testimony regarding her erratic behavior and lack of employment is compelling." "She can barely hold a job," Barbara shouted from the plaintiff's table, unable to help herself. "She's unstable." "Order," Miller said lazily. He looked at the paperwork in front of him, pen hovering over the signature line that would sign my life away. "I am granting the petition for emergency conservatorship." My heart stopped. The world went gray. It was over. The clearance, the career, the life. Bam! The sound wasn't the gavel. The double doors at the back of the room burst open with a loud wooden crack. Every head in the room turned. A man in a dark suit walked in. He wasn't a bailiff. He wasn't a lawyer. He moved with a speed and purpose that made the air in the room change pressure. He carried a black folder sealed with red security tape. "Stop," the man barked. "Excuse me?" Justice Miller bristled, his face turning red. "Who do you think you are bursting into my courtroom?" The man didn't stop. He walked straight past the bar, straight past my mother, who looked offended, and marched right up to the bench. "Courier for the Department of Defense," the man said, his voice cutting through the silence like a razor. He slammed the black folder down on top of the judge's paperwork. "Classified delivery for Chief Justice Miller. Eyes only, priority Alpha 1. The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Barbara looked confused. "Your Honor, I object. What is this?" Justice Miller ignored Barbara. He stared at the red tape on the folder. He looked at the courier, then at the folder again. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he reached out and broke the seal. The sound of a page turning had never sounded so loud. It echoed like a gunshot in the hushed courtroom. Chief Justice Miller read the first page of the black folder, his bushy gray eyebrows knit together. He flipped to the second page, his eyes widened. By the third page, the color had completely drained from his face, leaving his jowls looking waxy and pale. He looked up, but he didn't look at the lawyers. He didn't look at the gallery. He looked directly at me. For the first time since I walked in, there was no boredom in his eyes. There was no judgment. There was only fear and something that looked terrifyingly like awe. He closed the folder slowly, as if it contained a live grenade. "Your Honor," Mr. Henderson broke the silence, his voice tentative, "I assume this is some sort of delay tactic? My client is very distressed by this interruption." "Distressed?" Miller repeated. The word rolled out of his mouth flat and heavy. Barbara couldn't help herself. She stood up, smoothing her skirt with aggressive, jerky movements. "This is ridiculous. That man just barged in here. Evelyn probably hired an actor to deliver fake papers. She's unstable, Your Honor. She creates fantasies to avoid reality." "Sit down, Mrs. Davis," Miller said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice had dropped to a register that vibrated in the floorboards. "But I said sit down." Miller slammed his hand on the bench, making the wooden gavel jump. Barbara collapsed back into her chair, her mouth hanging open. The gallery gasped. Mrs. Gable looked like she was about to faint. Justice Miller stood up. Judges never stand up. They sit high above the fray, literal figureheads of authority. But Miller stood, pushing his heavy leather chair back. He picked up the black folder with both hands. "Mrs. Davis," Miller said, his eyes locking onto my mother, "you testified under oath that your daughter is unemployed, that she is a drain on society, that she sleeps all day and contributes nothing." "She does," Barbara squeaked. "She has no W-2s, she wears sweatpants." Miller opened the folder again, glancing at a highlighted paragraph. "Ma'am," Miller said, his voice ringing through the room, "according to this classified briefing provided by the Department of Defense, your daughter has been designated a critical national asset since she was 24 years old." The air left the room. I saw Marcus's pen drop from his hand. It clattered on the table. What?" Barbara whispered. "You worry about her finances," Miller continued, a dark amusement entering his tone. "You mentioned a deposit from Apex Solutions. That wasn't a scam, Mrs. Davis. That was a performance bonus. And judging by the pay grade listed here, your daughter makes more in a month than this court pays me in a year." I looked down at my hands. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room burning into me. The crazy girl, the shut-in. The narrative was shattering in real time. "But," Barbara stammered, looking frantically at her lawyer, then at me, "but she's in pajamas. She hissed at the sunlight." "Because she had been awake for 36 hours preventing a catastrophic failure of the Eastern power grid," Miller read from the file. He looked up, his expression stern. "While you were sleeping comfortably in the home she apparently subsidizes, Mrs. Davis, your daughter was ensuring you had electricity to run your coffee maker this morning." Miller looked at me again. He nodded. It was a small gesture, barely a tilt of the chin, but from a Chief Justice, it was a salute. "Mrs. Davis," Miller said softly, "on behalf of this court, I apologize for the indignity of this proceeding. Your service is noted." He turned his gaze back to Barbara. The awe was gone, replaced by the cold, hard gavel of justice. "The petition for conservatorship is denied with prejudice. This case is dismissed. And, Mrs. Davis," Barbara looked up, tears of humiliation finally spilling over, real tears this time. "Yes, if you ever waste my time or this woman's time again," Miller growled, I will hold you in contempt of court so fast your head will spin. Get out of my courtroom." He banged the gavel. Crack. The sound was final. It was the sound of chains breaking. The courier in the dark suit stepped forward, retrieved the black folder from the judge, turned to me and gave a sharp, professional nod. Then he marched out. I sat there for a moment, the silence ringing in my ears. Marcus nudged me. He was grinning like a maniac. "Did you hear that? With prejudice. She can never try this again." I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of the secret crushing me. I felt light. I turned to leave. I had to walk past the plaintiff's table. I had to walk past her. Barbara was still sitting there, staring at the empty space where the judge had been. She looked small. She looked old. The illusion of her control had been vaporized by a single manila folder. She looked up as I approached. Her eyes searched mine, looking for the daughter she thought she knew, the mess, the failure. But she didn't find her. She found me. "Evelyn, I didn't know." I stopped. I could have gloated. I could have screamed. But the exhausted analyst in me just wanted to go home. "I didn't ask," I said simply. I walked past her, past the gaping neighbors, past the stunned Aunt Linda, and pushed open the double doors. The hallway air wasn't cold anymore. It felt like freedom. The sidewalk outside the courthouse was bathed in the kind of aggressive, cheerful sunshine that usually gave me a migraine. Today, though, it felt like a spotlight. I took a deep breath, tasting car exhaust and pollen, and it was the sweetest thing I'd ever inhaled. I loosened the grip on my leather bag. My knuckles were regaining their color. "Evelyn, wait!" The voice came from behind me, breathless and desperate. I didn't stop, but I slowed down. I owed her that much. Or maybe I just wanted to see her face one last time without the threat of a court order hanging between us. Barbara caught up to me near the curb. Her hair was slightly askew, a rare failure of her hairspray. Her navy suit, usually armor, looked like a costume she was too tired to wear. "Evelyn," she panted, reaching out to touch my arm. I stepped back. It was a small movement, just an inch, but it was a canyon. She froze, her hand hovering in the air before dropping to her side. She struggled for words. Barbara Davis never struggled for words. "I didn't know. A national asset? Why didn't you tell me?" "I couldn't, and even if I could have, would you have listened? You saw a messy apartment and assumed I was broken. You saw a hoodie and assumed I was lazy." "I was worried," she cried, her voice cracking. "I'm your mother. I saw you suffering and I wanted to fix it. I wanted you to be normal, to be happy." I looked at her. Really looked at her. I saw the lines of worry etched around her mouth. I saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't a villain. She was just a woman who thought the only way to survive the world was to follow the rules perfectly. She didn't understand that some of us had to break the rules to keep the world spinning. "I am happy, Mom," I said softly. "I have a purpose. Just because it doesn't look like yours doesn't mean it's wrong." "But the secrecy, the isolation," she wrung her hands. "Can't you just come over for dinner? Sunday? We can talk. We can start over." I looked past her. Gliding silently to the curb was a black Chevrolet Suburban with tinted windows and government plates. The passenger window rolled down with a quiet electric hum. The driver was a man in sunglasses. He didn't look at my mother. He looked at me. "Agent Davis? Reynolds sent the transport. We have chatter on the secure line. You're needed." My mother stared at the car, then back at me, her eyes wide. The reality of it was finally sinking in. The black SUV, the title, the urgency. I wasn't her little girl anymore. I was a stranger with a security clearance higher than the judge who had just scolded her. "I have to go," I said. "Will I see you?" Her voice was small, stripped of all its usual command. "Maybe, but call first. Don't just show up. I opened the back door of the SUV. The interior smelled of leather and conditioned air. I climbed in and pulled the heavy door shut. The solid thunk sealed out the noise of the street, the traffic, and my mother. Through the tinted glass, I watched her standing on the sidewalk. She looked like a statue from a bygone era, confused by a world that had moved on without her. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. "Home. I have a shift to finish." The ride back was silent. When I got to my apartment, I didn't feel the usual weight of shame as I unlocked the door. I walked in. The pizza box was still on the counter. The air was still stale, but it didn't look like a dungeon anymore. It looked like a cockpit. I walked to the window and grabbed the edge of the blackout curtains. I paused for a second, looking out at the neighborhood. I saw Mrs. Gable walking her dog. I saw the mailman. I saw the power lines stretching across the street, humming with the electricity I fought to protect. They had no idea who I was. They thought I was the weird girl in 4B, and that was fine. They didn't need to know me. They just needed the lights to stay on. I pulled the curtains shut, plunging the room into darkness. I sat down in my chair. The ergonomic mesh hugged my back. I cracked my knuckles and tapped the spacebar. The screens roared to life. 3 monitors bathed my face in a soft digital red glow. The code scrolled like a waterfall, beautiful and infinite. System ready, user authenticated, ghost protocol. I put on my headset. "This is Davis," I said, my voice steady and strong in the quiet room. "I'm online. Let's get to work."